The whistle cut through the station air like a blade, slicing panic into my chest. The platform blurred past as the train began to move, its iron lungs breathing steam over the crowd. Through the glass, I saw her, Eva, running alongside the carriage, her hat askew, her hand outstretched. Her lips moved, shaping my name, but the roar of the engines swallowed every sound. I pressed my palm to the window, feeling the cold seep through, wishing my hand could pass through to hers. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the whole world narrowed to that pane of glass between us. Then her face changed. The desperate hope in her eyes shattered into raw, wide horror. She stumbled, not from exhaustion, but from recognition. Something, or rather someone, behind me. Her gaze darted past my shoulder, her mouth forming new words. I could not hear them, but I could see them. One word, repeated, over and over. My breath caught in my throat before I even turned. There are moments you can sense danger before you name it. This was one. I twisted in my seat. The man beside me was dressed in a dark wool coat, collar high, hat low. His posture was unnervingly straight, hands folded neatly over a black leather case. His eyes, pale, almost colorless, were fixed not on me but on my reflection in the window. He seemed to study me like an object in a museum display, cataloguing my every detail. I had never seen him before, or so I thought, but something in the rigid set of his jaw sparked a memory I did not want to recall. "Miss Muller," he said, his voice as precise as the click of a lock. My stomach turned. My name had not been spoken yet to anyone on this train. "Your sister seems quite distressed," he continued, each syllable weighed carefully like coins on a scale. I tried to muster a neutral smile, but it faltered halfway. Outside, Eva had stopped running. She stood frozen on the platform, chest heaving, eyes locked on mine. No, not mine, on his. The train gained speed, pulling away from the great steel ribs of the station. Passengers settled into murmured conversations, rustling newspapers, sipping coffee. But in our compartment, silence took root like frost. I could feel the man's gaze even when I looked away, the way one feels a storm building behind the horizon. My mind began stitching together threads I didn't want to follow. Old stories of my father's arrest, whispers of names I was told never to repeat. One of them had been Weiss. That morning, before we left for the station, Eva had woken me early, gripping my shoulders harder than necessary. "Whatever happens," she said, "don't speak to strangers on the train, and if you see someone you think you know, pretend you don't." I had laughed then, thinking her nervousness was a sister's overprotection. Now the weight of her warning pressed cold and heavy against my ribs. Weiss, was that the name she had been shouting? I glanced at the man again. He sat utterly still, yet I felt certain he was measuring my every blink, my every breath. Outside, the fields rolled by, pale and brittle in the winter light. I wanted to knock on the window, to shout for the conductor, to do anything but sit here, but fear pinned me in place. Eva's eyes had not lied. Whoever this man was, she wanted me far away from him, and now I was trapped in a moving box with him, miles from the station, no escape in sight. I turned back toward the window. The station had long vanished, swallowed by distance. All that remained of Eva was the image of her open mouth, the terror in her eyes. The train swayed gently, as if indifferent to my dread. The man shifted slightly, just enough to place his black leather case between us, his hand resting on it possessively. "We have much to discuss," he said quietly, almost pleasantly, and in that moment, I knew the journey ahead would not take me where I had planned to go. He leaned back as if settling in for a long conversation, though his spine remained perfectly straight. "You're traveling alone," he observed, not a question but a statement. His voice had a measured quality, each word deliberate as though he weighed the cost of syllables. I answered with a short nod, keeping my eyes on the blur of snow-dusted fields. "Strange," he continued, "a woman your age in times like these." I forced a polite smile, my fingers tightening on the hem of my coat. Every instinct urged me to speak less, listen more. The rhythm of the train punctuated his words, the steady clack of steel wheels, the occasional jolt that made the window shiver. He asked about my destination, my work, my family. I gave him fragments, a job in the city, a quiet life, no surviving parents. His gaze lingered on me, searching for cracks in my answers. "You have your mother's eyes," he said at last, almost wistfully. It struck me cold. My mother had been dead for over a decade, and strangers did not speak of her. I sipped the tea the attendant had brought, though it was already cooling in my hands. You knew her? I asked, keeping my voice level. Weiss's eyes didn't move from mine. We met briefly before the change. The word change hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning, the kind of meaning that makes people lower their voices and glance over their shoulders. I thought of father, of the whispered rumors, of the night soldiers took him away. Weiss's face remained unreadable, but I felt his words were deliberate hooks cast into my memory. The countryside outside was a shifting watercolor of white fields, black trees, and the faint skeletal outlines of villages. Inside, the compartment was warm, almost stifling, the air thick with the mingled scents of coal smoke and damp wool. I caught my reflection in the glass, pale, tense, lips pressed too tightly together. Behind me, his reflection was darker, sharper, a silhouette that seemed to belong to another time, another world. I wondered how Eva had recognized him so quickly, and why she hadn't told me his name sooner. You resemble your father too, Weiss said, drawing out the word father, like a man tasting something bitter. My pulse thudded in my ears. I reminded myself that to him I was still a stranger, a polite fellow passenger, but the way he watched me told me otherwise. This meeting was not chance. He was a good man, I said cautiously. Weiss's lips curved into something that was not a smile. That depends on who you ask. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, the silence sharper than any insult. I decided to test him. I don't recall you from the town, I said. He didn't blink. You wouldn't. My work kept me elsewhere. His eyes flicked to the leather case at his side, then back to me. The gesture was so slight it could have been accidental, but my mind caught on it like a thread snagged on glass. I wondered what lay inside. Documents, perhaps, or something far worse. My skin prickled with the knowledge that whatever it was, it mattered enough for him to guard it with his life. The train slowed slightly as it curved through a valley, and he glanced at the window. We'll be in the hills soon, he said, almost conversationally. A quiet stretch, fewer stops, easier to talk. The words settled over me like frost. He was making sure I knew I wouldn't be stepping off this train any time soon. My heart began to beat in rhythm with the wheels, every clack counting down to something I couldn't name yet. I turned my eyes back to the glass, focusing on the motion of the landscape, as if by ignoring him I could make him vanish. But his reflection stayed there, unwavering, watching me. It's rare, he murmured, to meet someone with such a significant past. I did not answer. In the window, my breath fogged the glass, blurring his face. But I knew when the mist cleared he would still be there, and the thought lodged in my chest. Eva had tried to keep me from him, but now it was already too late. The compartment rocked gently, and for the first time since departure, my eyes drifted to the inside pocket of my coat. The paper's edge pressed against my ribs. Eva's letter. She had slipped it to me that morning without explanation, her fingers trembling. "Don't read it until you're alone," she had whispered. I had assumed it was one of her overly cautious instructions, but now the weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Weiss's gaze followed the movement of my hand, and my fingers froze. He tilted his head slightly. "Something important?" The question was casual on the surface, but his tone was not. I forced my hand away from the pocket, pretending to adjust my coat. "Just a handkerchief," I said. He studied me for a long second, his pale eyes unreadable, before turning to look at the countryside. The brief reprieve of his attention didn't ease the tightness in my chest. I knew he'd noticed, and I knew he'd ask again. The train plunged into a tunnel, and the world outside vanished into blackness. The sudden darkness was almost physical, a cold, thick veil over the compartment. Every sound grew louder, the grind of wheels, the hum of the engine, my own heartbeat. Somewhere in that dark I heard his voice, low and close. "You carry more than you realize, Miss Müller." The words seemed to slip past my skin, into my bones. I didn't answer. The tunnel walls rushed by unseen. When light returned, I found him watching me again, his expression the same as before we'd entered the dark, as though the tunnel had been his stage, and I, the only audience. My hand was still pressed protectively over my coat pocket. "You should read it," he said. My breath caught. "It might save your life." I met his eyes, searching for a hint of mockery, but found none. That absence made the words far more dangerous. I excused myself to the lavatory, my movements deliberate, my face composed. Inside, the dim bulb flickered, casting shadows that twitched with the swaying of the train. My hands shook as I pulled out the envelope. It was sealed with a smear of wax, crude, rushed, as if she'd done it in the moments before we left. I broke it carefully, the paper tearing with a sound far too loud for the tiny space. Eva's handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged in places. "If you see Weiss, do not speak his name. He is the reason father is dead." My stomach turned. The words seemed to pulse on the page, each one heavier than the last. Beneath them, more instructions. "Do not let him see this letter. Get off at Lensdorf. I'll be waiting near the south gate." I read it twice, trying to slow my breathing, though the air in the lavatory was thin and stale. I folded the letter back into my coat, splashed cold water on my face, and returned to the compartment. Weiss didn't speak at first. He only tracked my movements with that precise stillness of his. Then, as the train curved through a snowy pass, he shifted the leather case toward himself and smiled faintly. "Feeling better?" The question was a trap, but I had no choice but to nod. Outside, the hills rose taller, the spaces between stations growing longer. I sat rigid in my seat, Eva's words burning into me. "Get off at Lensdorf." Weiss leaned back, watching the snow fall beyond the window. "We're not getting off for quite some time," he said, almost to himself, and I realized with a sickening weight that he might already know exactly where I was meant to escape. The rhythm of the train became a metronome for my thoughts, steady but suffocating. I tried to anchor my mind in the present, but Weiss's presence kept dragging me backward into years I had locked away. I could almost hear the sound of boots on our street, the sharp rap of knuckles on our front door. My father's voice, calm, too calm, telling Eva and me to go upstairs to stay quiet. The shadows on the walls had stretched long that night, like reaching fingers. Weiss shifted slightly in his seat, and the movement sent a shiver through me. I remembered another night, years before the arrest, when father had returned late, smelling of smoke and cold air. He had argued with my mother in the kitchen, voices muffled but tense. I had caught only fragments through the door. One of them was a name, Weiss. Even then, I'd felt the chill of it, though I didn't understand why. The train passed a frozen river, the ice reflecting a pale, fractured light into the compartment. Weiss spoke suddenly. "Your father was a stubborn man." I didn't look at him. "He believed in certain principles, costly ones." His tone was neither mocking nor admiring, but something colder, the tone of a man remembering unfinished business. The words settled like frost between us, silent and sharp. My mother had rarely spoken of father after that night. She'd burned letters in the stove, sold his books to strangers, erased his name from conversations. Only Eva and I had clung to fragments. The sound of his laugh, the feel of his coat collar when he hugged us, the way his eyes flickered toward the window when someone passed in the street. It was as though he'd been preparing for the moment they came for him. Weiss's pale gaze fixed on me again. "Do you know why he was taken?" I forced my voice to remain steady. "I know what they said." His lips curved slightly, as if I'd confirmed something for him. "And do you believe what they said?" I didn't answer. Silence was safer than lies and far safer than truth. He leaned back, but I could still feel the weight of his eyes. The compartment door slid open briefly as a conductor passed, nodding at us before moving on. For a moment I felt the faintest hope, the presence of someone else, someone who might notice if I disappeared. But as the door shut, the world shrank again to just the two of us, the cold window glass and the unspoken history between us. Weiss tapped his fingers against the leather case, each beat measured, deliberate. I thought of Eva on the platform, her horror so immediate, so certain. She hadn't just recognized Weiss, she'd remembered something, something I had forgotten or never known. The more I tried to reach for it, the more it slipped away, like trying to hold smoke in my hands. My father's face in my memory blurred with time, but now Weiss's shadow seemed to fall over it, obscuring it completely. The train curved into another stretch of wilderness, the sky a flat grey sheet above snow-laden pines. The quiet was almost absolute, except for the low hum of the engine. Weiss spoke again, softly, as if confiding a secret. "Your father and I disagreed on certain matters. In the end, I was proven right." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I already knew that whatever he'd been right about had cost my father everything, and now it might cost me too. Weiss rose smoothly, buttoning his coat. "I'll fetch us tea," he said, as if we were merely polite acquaintances, sharing a pleasant journey. The door slid shut behind him, and for the first time since boarding I was alone. My pulse quickened. This was my only chance. My eyes darted to the black leather case resting by his seat. It was angled toward him even in his absence, as if his presence clung to it. I hesitated, listening for footsteps in the corridor. Nothing but the distant clatter of wheels. My hands moved before my mind could second guess. The clasp was stiff, but yielded under steady pressure, opening with a sound that made my breath catch. Inside lay neatly folded documents, each stamped with an official seal. Beneath them, a small velvet pouch. I opened it and froze. A silver pocket watch slid into my palm, its casing engraved with curling initials, KM, my father's. I'd watched him wind it every night, his thumb rubbing that engraving until it shone. My stomach turned to ice. Why would Weiss have this? I replaced it quickly, my fingers clumsy as if the metal burned. I shoved the pouch back under the papers, but my hands shook so badly the edges crumpled. There was more. Beneath the documents, nestled in a false bottom, lay a revolver. The metal caught the pale winter light like a blade. I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I stared at it for a heartbeat too long, knowing what it meant. Weiss didn't just carry the past with him, he carried the means to end anyone who threatened it. The train swayed and I nearly lost my balance. I forced the case closed and slid it back exactly as it had been. My heartbeat was loud enough to drown the wheel's clatter. My fingers still tingled from touching the watch, from brushing against that pouch of velvet and grief. Somewhere outside, a crow called, its cry thin against the winter air. I sat down, trying to arrange my face into something that wouldn't betray me. The compartment door slid open. Weiss stepped inside, the faint aroma of tea preceding him. He set 2 cups on the small table, his movements unhurried. "There," he said lightly, settling into his seat. But his eyes flicked briefly, oh so briefly, to the leather case. My pulse stuttered. He lifted his tea and took a slow sip, his gaze never leaving mine. I tried to drink as well, but the liquid felt too hot, too heavy. He spoke after a moment, his tone conversational. "It's remarkable how many things survive after a man is gone. Some objects are too personal to discard." The words slid between us like a knife through silk. My fingers tightened around the cup until the porcelain bit into my skin. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, blurring the world beyond the glass. Inside, the air felt close, heavy. Weiss set down his cup, the porcelain clicking against the table. "You seem unsettled," he said, as though testing me. I managed a thin smile, but inside I was already certain. He knew I had touched the case, and he wasn't going to let me forget it. The tea had gone cold by the time I set it down. My hand drifted once more to the letter in my coat, the paper a reassuring but dangerous weight. Weiss watched the snow beyond the glass, seemingly uninterested, yet I could feel his awareness coil in the space between us. The train slowed for a brief stop, the hiss of steam filling the compartment. Lensdorf couldn't be far now. My breath quickened despite my best efforts to steady it. When he looked away to check his watch, I seized the moment. "Excuse me," I murmured, rising and stepping into the corridor. My boots clicked on the narrow floor as I moved toward the lavatory again. Inside, I bolted the door and pulled the letter free. My fingers fumbled the folds in my haste, the paper soft and creased from being handled too much. The words were as sharp as the first time I read them. "If you see Weiss, do not speak his name. He is the reason Father is dead." My eyes burned, but I forced myself to keep reading. "Get off at Lensdorf. Southgate. I'll be there." The last line was underlined twice, smudged with what could have been water or tears. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment, as if it could steady my heartbeat. I emerged to find Weiss still seated, but his gaze slid to the corridor behind me before settling back on my face. "Feeling better?" The question was too smooth. The train began to slow again, and my pulse surged. We were approaching a station. My mind raced through Eva's instructions. Southgate, quick steps, no hesitation. I placed my hand on the door handle. Then Weiss spoke without looking at me. "We are not getting off yet." His voice was quiet, certain, leaving no room for argument. The brakes groaned. The train shuddered to a halt, and outside I could see the platform, small, dusted with snow, a single station guard at the far end. This wasn't Lensdorf, but close enough to make my chest ache with temptation. I forced myself to stay seated. Weiss's eyes flicked briefly toward the platform, then back to mine. "Some towns," he said, "are better left behind." The door slid open to admit a new passenger, a man in a wool cap who greeted Weiss politely before stowing his bag. The moment for escape was gone, swallowed by the rhythm of the journey as the train began to move again. Snow blurred the glass until the outside world became nothing but a shifting whiteness. Weiss folded his hands, content, as though he had just won a silent contest I hadn't agreed to play. My fingers curled into fists in my lap, the letter's edges biting into my palm. I would have to wait until Lensdorf itself. if we ever stopped there at all. The train picked up speed, its motion relentless, and I realized with a cold certainty that Weiss might already know about Ava's plan. Worse still, he might know exactly how to be at the south gate before I was. The snow outside had thickened into a veil, erasing the horizon. Inside, the compartment felt smaller than ever, the air dense with unspoken things. Weiss sat with one leg crossed over the other, his posture as composed as if he were in a drawing room, not a moving train slicing through winter. "You and your sister are very close," he said at last. His tone was neutral, but it made my stomach tighten. I kept my eyes on the blurred whiteness beyond the window. "We look out for each other," I said. He nodded slowly. "I imagine she's been looking out for you for quite some time." The way he phrased it made it sound less like praise and more like an accusation. My hand moved unconsciously toward my coat pocket, where Ava's letter rested like a small, defiant heartbeat. Weiss leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "She's not far, you know." The words slid into the space between us with deliberate weight. My breath faltered. "Perhaps you'll see her sooner than you expect." His gaze held mine, unblinking, and I felt the trap in his voice. He wanted me to react, to give away what I knew. I forced my shoulders to stay still. "Does she know you're here?" he asked, almost idly. I gave a small shrug. "She knows I can take care of myself." Weiss's lips curved faintly, as though at a private joke. "Ah, but does she?" His meaning hung in the air, dark and unspoken, as the train tilted gently through a curve. The shadows of passing pines swept over us like the bars of a cage. The compartment door rattled briefly as a draft passed through the corridor, then settled again. Weiss adjusted the cuff of his coat, his movements precise, controlled. "Your father once told me that stubbornness was a family trait," he said. "I see he wasn't wrong." I swallowed the reply that rose in my throat. He wanted to get under my skin, and I couldn't let him. "You speak as though you knew him well," I said finally, my voice even. Weiss's eyes narrowed slightly. "I knew him better than you think, better than he wanted anyone to know." He glanced at the case, then back at me. "The truth, Miss Muller, is rarely as pure as we imagine." His tone made the word truth sound like a blade being unsheathed. The train roared across a bridge, the echo of steel on steel rising into a howl, before fading into silence again. Something in me shifted in that moment. Fear was still there, yes, but it was sharpening into something harder. Weiss might think he could control the pace of this game, but I knew now I couldn't simply wait for an opening. I would have to make one. I met his gaze, steady this time. "Then perhaps you'll enlighten me," I said. For a second, he seemed almost pleased, as though he'd been waiting for me to step onto the board willingly. "Oh," Weiss murmured, "I intend to." And in the pale reflection of the window, I saw the faintest flicker of satisfaction cross his face, the look of a man who believed his opponent had just taken the bait. The train's pace eased as we approached a small station tucked between pine-covered slopes. A conductor stepped into the compartment, handing Weiss a folded telegram with a murmured, "Urgent." Weiss took it without comment, slipping a coin into the man's palm before unfolding the paper. I tried to glance without being obvious, but he angled it just enough to shield the words. Still, I caught the last line before he folded it. "Subject located. Intercept." My pulse jolted. There was only one subject Weiss could mean. Ava. He read the message again, his mouth tightening into something like satisfaction. Then, very deliberately, he placed the telegram into the leather case and snapped it shut. "A change in itinerary," he said mildly, as though announcing a shift in the weather. "We'll be making a longer stop soon." Outside, the snow had lightened into a fine drift, the landscape opening into a wide valley. The platform we slowed past was nearly deserted, save for two uniformed men smoking by the signal post. I searched their faces for recognition, but they did not look toward the train. Weiss, however, studied them as if confirming arrangements. My stomach turned. I could see it in his eyes. This stop was not for me to get away. When the train began moving again, Weiss leaned back as calm as ever. "It's a strange thing," he said, "to search for someone for years and then find them by chance." His words were like stones dropped into a still pond, rippling outward until they reached me. "Who is it you found?" I asked, though my voice was too sharp. His smile was small and humorless. "You'll see soon enough." The valley narrowed into a cutting of rock and snow, the rails clinging to the edge of a riverbank. My breath misted the glass, my mind racing through Ava's instructions. The south gate, the crowd, the quick steps away from danger. But with every mile it was clearer. Weiss would make sure I never saw that gate, and if the telegram meant what I feared, Ava might already be in his reach. Weiss took out his pocket watch, my father's, and wound it with slow, deliberate turns. "Timing," he said quietly, "is everything." I stared at the gleam of the watch, fighting the urge to snatch it from his hands. His gaze flicked to mine and held it, as though daring me to try. The train began a long descent, the rails curving sharply toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. The station there was larger, with a freight yard and multiple tracks. I could already see dark figures moving near the edge of the platform, though it was too far to make out their faces. Weiss stood, buttoning his coat. "Come," he said. "It's time to meet your family." As he reached for the case, my body moved before my mind could catch up. I yanked open the door and bolted into the corridor. The train jolted, but I kept my footing, my heart hammering against my ribs. Somewhere ahead, the carriage door to the outside waited. I didn't think, I ran. The wind hit me like a wall when I wrenched the exterior door open. The ground blurred below, snow, gravel, steel, a dizzying rush of white and black. My fingers clung to the rail for half a heartbeat, then I jumped. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, the frozen earth a brutal slap that sent pain jolting up my side. I rolled, snow filling my collar and stinging my cheeks. The roar of the train receded, but not for long. Shouts cut through the cold air. Weiss's voice, sharp, commanding, rose above the others. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the protest in my ribs. The valley here was narrow, the river on one side, a steep slope on the other. I ran toward the trees, boots crunching over the crusted snow. Behind me, the thud of pursuing footsteps grew louder. The first shot cracked through the air, echoing off the rock walls. Snow exploded at my feet, the sound deafening in the winter stillness. I veered toward the riverbank, my breath tearing in my throat. The cold bit at my face, but fear kept me moving. Another shot rang out closer this time, and I ducked behind a cluster of boulders slick with ice. For a moment all I could hear was my heartbeat and the river's low murmur. Then, crunch, snow under a boot. Weiss was close, his steps deliberate, his voice low. "You can't outrun this, Miss Miller, not here." The words carried easily over the frozen air. I pressed myself into the shadows, the letter from Eva still crumpled in my fist. I darted from cover, plunging into the line of pines. Branches whipped at my face, snagged my coat. The forest floor was uneven, hidden beneath the snow, each step a gamble. My breath formed ragged clouds in the air, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't look back. Looking back slowed you down. The slope rose steeply, my boots slipping on patches of ice. Somewhere behind me, a man swore, his voice muffled by the trees. The shots had stopped, but that didn't mean the hunt had. My legs burned, the cold gnawing at my fingers. Then ahead I saw it, a dark, squat shape half buried in snow, an old railway signal house, abandoned. I stumbled toward it, my body screaming for rest. The wooden door was warped but gave way under my weight, the hinges groaning. Inside, it smelled of dust and rusted metal, the air stale but still warmer than outside. Faint light filtered through cracks in the boards. I pushed the door shut, heart hammering, and turned to find Eva. Ava was slumped against the wall, her wrists bound with rough twine, her hair tangled and wet with melting snow. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but it wasn't relief I found there. It was urgency. "Clara," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "you have to listen. We don't have time." I knelt beside her, fumbling at the knots. My hands shook, whether from the cold or fear I couldn't tell. She caught my wrists before I could finish. "It wasn't father he killed," she said, her voice raw. "It was your real father." The words slammed into me harder than the train's jump ever had. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Eva's eyes searched mine, pleading for belief. "You were adopted, Clara. They never told you. Weiss, he was sent for you, not for me." The door creaked behind me. Weiss stood in the threshold, framed by the white glare of snow, his revolver steady in his hand. His face was unreadable, but his voice was quiet, almost intimate. "Your sister has a talent for half-truths." My fingers tightened on Eva's arm, pulling her closer. The smell of cold iron from the gun filled the room, mingling with the dust. "I don't believe you," I said, though the certainty in my voice was thin. Weiss's gaze didn't waver. "I knew your parents, both sets. One tried to keep you hidden. The other," he let the sentence die, but the implication hung between us. Outside, the wind rattled the boards, a low, urgent drumbeat against the silence inside. Ava shifted, her hand slipping inside her coat. My mind flashed back to the revolver in Vice's case. She met my eyes for just a fraction of a second, enough for me to understand. Then she moved. In one motion, she brought the weapon up, her bound wrists awkward but determined. Vice's eyes flickered, the first sign of surprise I'd seen in him. The gunshot shattered the stillness, deafening in the small space. The smell of gunpowder bit at my nose, smoke curling in the air like a living thing. I felt the concussion of the shot in my chest, but in the confusion, the ringing in my ears, the blur of motion, I couldn't tell who had been hit. Vice staggered, or maybe Ava did. My own vision narrowed to a tunnel. I lunged forward, catching someone as they fell. My hands came away warm and wet, the metallic scent thick in the air. My mind screamed at me to know who it was, but the world tilted, voices receding into a hollow distance. Snow blew in through the open door, settling over us like ash. Somewhere far off, the train's whistle echoed through the valley, a long, mournful note. And in that suspended moment I understood only this: whatever truth lay between Vice, Ava, and myself, it would remain buried here, under snow, under silence, under the weight of what we could never take back. If that ending left your heart racing, don't let the story stop here. Hit like if you felt the chill of the snow and the weight of the secrets. Subscribe so you're here for the next tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Every click keeps the stories alive, and some secrets are worth following to the very end.